Tonight at Oxford University, Professor Stavrakopoulou's lecture on the mythological origins of Genesis has drawn both acclaim and outrage. Outside, protesters hold signs reading, "Defend biblical truth," while inside, smartphones capture every controversial word. Her voice rises with scholarly passion as she displays side-by-side translations of the Enuma Elish and Genesis 1. These aren't merely similar, she declares, pointing to the highlighted parallels. Genesis 1 is clearly participating in a mythological conversation that had been ongoing for centuries before it was written. The evidence is overwhelming. The university's livestream comment section explodes with debate. Religious viewers accuse her of attacking their faith. Academics praise her methodological research. An elderly pastor in the front row clutches his Bible, his knuckles white with tension, as centuries of certainty crumble beneath the weight of comparative analysis. This fictive scene plays out weekly across universities and theological seminaries worldwide. The sacred creation story of Genesis, the foundation of Jewish, Christian, and Islamic understanding of our origins, now revealed as one strand in a large image of ancient myths, not a unique divine revelation. What does it mean when a sacred text, once thought divinely inspired, reveals its human ancestry? The emergence of comparative mythology has revolutionized our understanding of the Bible. No longer can we view Genesis in isolation, as if it descended from heaven untouched by human hands. Instead, we see a document deeply embedded in the cultural and mythological framework of its time, a product of ancient Near Eastern thought, not a transcendent exception to it. Today, we explore how Genesis 1 draws from a rich reservoir of older cosmogonic myths, adapting and transforming pre-existing stories into a new theological framework. By tracing these parallels, we uncover not just the historical reality of biblical origins, but we confront a profound question. Why should we privilege this particular creation myth when it so clearly builds upon older polytheistic accounts? The Enuma Elish, etched into clay tablets around 1800 BCE, tells how Marduk, champion of the younger gods, battles Tiamat, the saltwater ocean personified as a monstrous dragon. After vanquishing her, Marduk splits Tiamat's corpse into two. He sliced her in half like a fish for drying. Half of her he set up and sealed it as the sky. From chaotic waters emerges an ordered chaos. The parallel with Genesis is unmistakable. When we read, "In the beginning, the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep," we encounter the Hebrew word tehom, the deep. This term linguistically echoes the very name of the Babylonian goddess Tiamat, revealing an ancient memory preserved in biblical language. The sequence of creation itself follows a template that appears first in Mesopotamian texts. Primordial watery chaos, creation of light, separation of waters by a firmament, formation of dry land, creation of celestial bodies, creation of plants and animals, creation of humanity. This identical sequence cannot be coincidental. Scholars have demonstrated that Genesis 1 follows the structure of earlier Mesopotamian cosmogonies while transforming their polytheistic content. The biblical firmament, that solid dome separating the waters above from the waters below, mirrors Marduk's division of Tiamat's body, transforming a violent mythic battle into an ordered divine command. Even the creation of humanity carries echoes of the Mesopotamian belief that humans were fashioned from divine substance to serve the gods. Frederick Delitzsch, though his views were contested, recognized the undeniable connection. In the biblical creation account, we find the fingerprints of Babylonian mythology reimagined through a monotheistic lens. While Mesopotamian influence dominates scholarly discussion, Egyptian mythology offers equally compelling parallels to Genesis 1. The Egyptians envisioned creation emerging from Nun, the primordial watery abyss, a concept strikingly similar to the deep of Genesis 1-2. The Memphite theology of ancient Egypt, carved on the Shabaka stone, describes how the creator god Ptah spoke the world into existence through divine utterance, a concept that resonates powerfully with Genesis 1's repeated refrain, "And God said, let there be." In Egyptian cosmology, the sky goddess Nut arches her body over the earth, creating a dome that separates the waters above from those below, a mythological expression of the same cosmological understanding we find in Genesis 1's firmament. A.H. Sasi and A.S. Yehuda argued nearly a century ago that Genesis bears closer resemblance to Egyptian creation myths than Mesopotamian ones. The emergence from primordial waters, creation through divine speech, and the establishment of cosmic order all suggest that biblical authors drew from Egyptian conceptual wells. The Egyptian Book of the Dead records the creator god Atum declaring, "I am Atum when I was alone in Nun," before proceeding to create through self-procreation and divine speech. Different mechanisms, but a shared conceptual foundation with Genesis. What we're witnessing is not direct borrowing, but a pervasive cosmological framework that transcended political boundaries in the ancient Near East, a shared cultural understanding of how the world came to be. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of Genesis 1 is its reflection of ancient cosmology. A flat earth covered by a solid dome called the firmament, or rakia. This wasn't merely poetic language, it represented the scientific understanding of the time. In Genesis 1:6-7, God creates this dome to separate the waters above from the waters below. The Hebrew term rakia derives from the root meaning to hammer out or to spread out, evoking the image of a metallic dome hammered into shape, a physical, tangible structure. Ancient Near Eastern cosmology envisioned a flat, circular earth disk, a solid dome overhead containing the celestial bodies, waters surrounding the earth, waters above the dome, the source of rain, and pillars supporting both the earth and the heavens. This cosmology appears throughout the Bible. Job 37:18 describes the sky as hard as cast metal mirror. In Ezekiel's vision, the prophet sees the likeness of a firmament, like the awesome gleam of crystal spread out above the divine throne. Genesis 1:14 places the sun, moon, and stars in the firmament, not beyond it, physically embedding within this solid structure these celestial bodies. When ancient Israelites looked up, they didn't see endless space like we do. They saw a physical barrier holding back primordial waters. This understanding wasn't unique to Israel. It reflected the scientific consensus of the ancient world from Mesopotamia to Egypt, even to Greece. This insight proves devastating to literal interpretations of Genesis. The text doesn't present a scientifically accurate picture of creation, but instead reflects the limited cosmological understanding of its time, further evidence of its human origin. The most explosive evidence for biblical borrowing comes not from distant Mesopotamia or Egypt, but from Israel's immediate neighbors, the Canaanites. The discovery of the Ugaritic texts in 1929 shattered any notion of biblical uniqueness. Here in Israel's own backyard were myths that clearly provided the raw materials for biblical stories. The Hebrew Bible doesn't just borrow distant cosmological concepts, it repurposes specific Canaanite deities and mythological figures. The evidence is literally hiding in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of biblical poetry. In Psalm 74, we read, "You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan." This isn't isolated imagery. It's a direct parallel to the Baal cycle, where Baal defeats the seven-headed sea monster, Lotan. Visual comparison shows the Ugaritic text describing Lotan as the twisting serpent, side by side with Isaiah 27:1 describing Leviathan in identical terms. The biblical authors didn't invent these motifs, they inherited them. The God of Israel fights the same cosmic enemies as the Canaanite storm god Baal. While Genesis 1 presents a demythologized creation without explicit divine battle, the memory of this chaos Kampf, this war against chaos, persists through the Bible, revealing its Canaanite DNA. Even more striking is the biblical god's name and identity. The Canaanite high god was called El, and the Bible frequently calls El or uses the plural form Elohim. In Genesis 14, Abraham is blessed by Melchizedek in the name of El Elyon, a title directly borrowed from Canaanite religion, where El was indeed God Most High. The biblical phrase, "let us make man in our image," in Genesis 1:26, has puzzled readers for centuries. The plural form makes little sense in strict monotheism, but makes perfect sense when we recognize it as a vestige of the Canaanite divine council, where El consults with his divine assembly. Archaeologist discoveries at Kuntilat Adrud reveal inscriptions mentioning Yahweh and his Asherah, suggesting that early Israelite religion included worship of a goddess consort, just like Canaanite El and his consort Asherah. This isn't just borrowing stories, it's evidence that Israelite and Canaanite religions shared common roots before biblical authors reimagined their traditions. The Bible's struggle against Canaanite influence, constant prohibitions against going after other gods and worshiping on high places, testifies to how deeply intertwined these religious traditions were. The vehemence of biblical polemic against Canaanite practices reveals not separation, but intimate connection. Genesis 1 emerges not as an isolated divine revelation, but as one voice in a chorus of ancient creation myths. The evidence doesn't end with Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Canaan. The Hindu Nasadiya Sukta from the Rig Veda begins with darkness, enveloped by darkness, with only unfathomable water imagery, startlingly parallel to Genesis 1:2. It mentions that one, breathing windlessly, reminiscent of God's spirit hovering over the waters. Greek cosmogony in Hesiod's Theogony begins with chaos, a void from which Gaia, Earth, emerges, followed by the separation of Earth and sky, Uranus, a sequence mirroring Genesis 1's progression from void to separated realms. It's even echoed in the Greek Old Testament. These are births of the heavens and of the earth, and they're being prepared in the day of Jehovah God's making earth and heavens. Young Literal Translation, Genesis 2:4. Persian Zoroastrian texts describe creation unfolding over stages, with Ahurmazd creating sky, water, earth, plants, and animals, and finally, the first human, a sequence that parallels the creation week of Genesis. The parallels extend across cultures and continents, revealing how Genesis 1 participates in humanity's universal quest to understand our origins. What distinguishes it is not its uniqueness, but its theological transformation of shared mythological elements. Scholars like John Walton, Ronald Hendel, and Brevard Childs have demonstrated that Genesis 1 represents myth in the academic sense, a narrative that conveys profound cultural truths within the framework of ancient cosmological understanding. The scholarly debate about monotheism in the Bible adds further complexity. Some scholars argue that true monotheism emerged only gradually in Israelite religion. The documentary hypothesis suggests different theological perspectives among the source documents, with the priestly source of Genesis 1 potentially reflecting post-exilic theological developments, while earlier sources contain more explicit polytheistic elements. Mark Smith and others have demonstrated that early Israelite religion likely viewed Yahweh as one God among many, with true monotheism developing way later. Archaeological evidence, including inscriptions mentioning Yahweh as Asherah, suggests that ancient Israelite religion was more complex and diverse than traditional interpretations admit. The question is not whether Genesis borrowed from older myths. That evidence is undeniable. But why we should consider it more authoritative than its sources. As the evidence for biblical borrowing from older myths has mounted, religious defenders have developed increasingly elaborate apologetics to preserve the notion of Genesis as unique divine revelation. These defenses typically fall into several categories, each revealing the desperation of those unwilling to face historical reality. The first line of defense claims that similarities between Genesis and older myths are merely superficial coincidences. This argument collapses under the weight of specific detailed parallels in structure, sequence, and conceptual framework, parallels too numerous and precise to be coincidental. Other apologists concede the similarities but invert the relationship, suggesting that pagan myths are corruptions of an original, pure revelation preserved in Genesis. This view requires ignoring basic chronology. The Mesopotamian and Egyptian myths, they're demonstrably older, predating the biblical accounts by millennia. More sophisticated defenders attempt to reframe Genesis 1 as a polemic against pagan myths, deliberately using their language and concepts to refute them. This clever plot still admits that Genesis is responding to and dependent upon these earlier traditions, undermining claims of independent divine revelation. When confronted with the solid dome cosmology in Genesis 1, some apologists resort to claiming that the firmament is merely poetic language. This ignores the Hebrew term rakia, explicitly describing a solid, hammered-out structure, and contradicts how ancient Israelites themselves understood their own cosmos. Scientific concordism, the attempt to discover modern scientific insights in Genesis, represents perhaps the most strained apologetic approach. These readings anachronistically impose modern concepts onto ancient texts, turning in "let there be light" into the Big Bang, or the waters above into a vapor canopy. The most telling sign of apologetic weakness is the constant shifting of ground. When one harmonization attempt fails, another takes its place, revealing that the conclusion, Genesis must be unique divine revelation, is fixed in their minds in advance, with evidence manipulated to fit this predetermined outcome. Historical critical scholarship offers a far more honest approach. Genesis 1 is an ancient text reflecting ancient cosmological understandings. Its value lies not in scientific accuracy, but in theological insight. The revolutionary concept that a single deity created an ordered world with purpose. Genesis 1 stands revealed as a beautiful cultural artifact, a creative adaptation of ancient Near Eastern myths transformed to express a revolutionary monotheistic theology. Its brilliance lies not in divine dictation, but in human theological innovation. What dissolves before our eyes is the notion that Genesis offers a scientifically accurate or uniquely revealed account of creation. Instead, we find a text deeply embedded in its cultural moment, reflecting the limited scientific understanding and mythological frameworks of its time. The solid dome of the firmament has given way to the infinite expanse of space. The six-day creation has yielded to billions of years of cosmic and biological evolution, the primordial waters have evaporated in light of modern cosmology. Why should we privilege this particular creation story when it is so clearly building upon older mythological foundations? If we recognize Genesis 1 as mythology, as a human attempt to making meaning of our universe, of existence, we might appreciate its profound theological insights without insisting on its scientific or historical accuracy. We might honor it as one culture's magnificent contribution to humanity's quest for understanding. The power of myths lies not in their literal truth, but in their capacity to convey deeper meanings. Genesis 1 transformed ancient mythology to express revolutionary idea that a single, benevolent deity created an ordered cosmos, a profound theological insight embedded in the mythological language of its time. The question is not whether Genesis borrows from older myths. This is undeniable. But whether we have the courage to embrace this truth and still find meaning in this ancient text. In the end, we face a choice between comforting illusions and liberating truth. Genesis stands revealed not as the unique word of God, but as one luminous thread in humanity's picture of creation stories. Beautiful, profound, but undeniably human.